Genesis chapter 3, verse 16. This is a very fascinating verse for a lot of different reasons. Translating it from the Greek is tricky at times. The specific translation choices that were made by the translator are kind of interesting as well. And the underlying Hebrew is fairly controversial, so let's get into all those different things. Kai te gunaiki apen, plethunon, plethuno, tas lupasu, kai tan stenagmansu, in lupais texe tekna, and then we'll finish it here in a few moments. We'll begin with the person to whom God is speaking. He has spoken in the prior verse to Satan. Now he is speaking to the woman. And it's worth zooming out. If you remember back a few verses ago, when God is walking in the garden, he first addresses the man, then he addresses the woman, because the man passes the buck to her, and then he addresses the serpent. Now, when he is pouring out both the sort of punishments, the curses, and so forth, he first curses the serpent. We saw that in the prior verse. Now he's speaking to the woman, and in the subsequent verses, he will speak to the man. So the structure there is rather elegant. Apen here is the main verb. We've seen that numerous times. The third singular aorist from Lego. The Lord God is the one speaking. So, and he said to the woman, and here is the direct speech. Plethunon is the first verb here. This is from plethuno, and this means to increase. Something along those lines. I think we've seen that previously as well. And this particular form with the omega nu ending is not a genitive plural. This is a participle. It's nominative, singular, masculine, present, active participle. So increasing, but then it's repeated. Plethuno. Just one minor spelling change, but that makes this second installment a first singular future active indicative of the same verb. So that's kind of interesting. Basically, it means something to the effect of increasing, I will increase. Now what's going on here? The underlying Hebrew that this is almost certainly translated from is charava erave. And you can even probably, if you don't know Hebrew, you can still hear the repetition there. This is the same verb repeated twice. The first version of it is an infinitive absolute. The second one is a hifil, sort of indicative verb. And so the Greek translator here, and we've seen similar phenomena in the past. This is quite common in the Hebrew when you have an infinitive absolute followed by the same verb but in a different form. That will often be picked up with a participle followed by an indicative in Greek. And so the underlying Hebrew is something like increasing, I will increase. And so the Greek translator here is rather wooden. Now, what is God increasing? Tas lupas. This is from lupe, which means grief or pain. And so it's plural there. So I will increase your pains. And tan stenagman. This is the word for groaning, as in birth pain or something like that when you're delivering a child. So he will increase both your pains and your groaning. And then he repeats the translator here in lupais. This is going back to lupe once again. Notice it's still plural. In pains. And then the verb is texe, which is from tiktos. Minor spelling change here. This is a second singular future middle indicative. This means to give birth. And when you give birth to tekna, children. So the final translation would be something like, and he said to the woman, increasing, I will increase your pains and your groaning. In pains, you will give birth to children. But let's continue with the rest of the verse. Ke proston andrasu he apostrophesu. Ke altas su kuriuse. And this is where things get a little bit tricky. We begin with the noun here, apostrophe. And that's derived from apostrepho as a verb. And in its simplest form, this means something to the effect of return. So your return, notice it's still speaking to the woman, will be proston andra su, to, towards, or with your husband, referring, of course, to Adam. But that particular word and how to translate it is rather tricky in the Greek. So some of the English translations of the Septuagint, and I'll cover those in a future video, use recourse. So if you're familiar with the New English translation of the Septuagint, also known as Nets, and actually the Lexham English Septuagint, they both translate this word with recourse. not sure that helps all that much. Well, let's take a look at some of the lexicons. In a future video, I'll go into these in more detail, but let's start with Muriaka's Greek-English lexicon of the Septuagint. And here's his entry for apostrophe, and he does say return. That's pretty normal, or going back. Fair enough. That's the basic meaning. But notice what he says for Genesis 3:16. Turning to somebody for companionship and intimacy. Well, that's an interesting gloss there. It's very positive. Your desire for intimacy will be for your husband, and this is pretty much the main example he gives for that. So that's an interesting choice, or an interesting option. If you look at the Lust Einical Hauspie lexicon, which tends to stay a little bit closer to the Hebrew, again, they'll say turning back or turning away from or return. So that's, again, the more normal way that this word will be used. But notice they also have a special entry for Genesis 3:16 because it has proven to be so controversial. And they think it means something like inclination or maybe urge, but notice they have a question mark there because, again, they're not 100% sure. And so the lexicographers here are not quite sure whether this is a positive thing, a negative thing. What would recourse mean? Your turning will be towards your husband. It's actually rather debated, and I'm not entirely sure what the right answer is, to be honest. But let's continue and finish it out. And he, that is the husband, kuriousse. This is from kuriouo. And notice the sigma there. There's a third singular future active indicative. You can probably recognize that kurios is under the hood. This is to exercise lordship or to dominate, and it typically does take the genitive as its direct object as opposed to the accusative. So he will dominate or exercise lordship over you. And so the translation here leaves a lot of open questions. Is this a positive desire for your husband for companionship, but he will in turn dominate you? Or is it more negative in terms of you're going to take action against your husband and then he will lord over you, something like that? It remains an open question. And so why is that? Well, the underlying Hebrew is also an open question. And so the Masoretic says, Va'el ishka, or isheka, teshukteka. Pardon me if that's terrible pronunciation. And this is husband here. This is the word that is translated with apostrophe. And in Hebrew, it basically means your desire. But the big debate has been, what is going on with this el? Is it for? Is it against? And so forth. Obviously, the translator here has chosen pros, which is a fairly neutral translation of that. But there's been a lot of debate about what to do with this translation. In fact, even recently, this is the ESV changes for 2025. They just published these. One of the biggest changes is a modification of how they're rendering this underlying Hebrew phrase. In the prior edition, it was a contrary to, and they translated with desire, and then a but here. The husband will rule over you. They're changing it now. Your desire will be for your husband, and then an and as opposed to a but. Of course, if you remember, this was a kai in the Greek. So they're also grappling with, is this a positive or a negative? Contrary being negative, for being positive, and that, again, is a big debate. And a lot of English translations are kind of all over the map when it comes to this. So sorry for the long video, but there's actually a lot going on with this one simple verse, where God is pronouncing his judgment on the woman due to the fall there in the garden. So a lot of interesting moving parts.